Well, I am running for president of the United States to lead our great American comeback. Look, we know our country's going in the wrong direction. We see it with our eyes and we feel it in our bones. Our southern borders collapse. Drugs are pouring into the country. Our cities are being hollowed out by spiking crime. The federal government's making it harder for the average family to make ends meet and to attain and maintain a middle-class lifestyle. And our president, well, he lacks vigor, flounders in the face of our nation's challenges, and he takes his cues from the woke mob. I don't think it has to be this way. American decline is not inevitable. It is a choice, and we should choose a new direction, a path that will lead to American revitalization. We must restore sanity to our nation.
We just talked to the spokesperson for Donald Trump. Now let's talk to the spokesperson for the Never Back Down PAC. That's DeSantis's PAC, a former Trump campaign advisor, now working for DeSantis, Steve Cortes. Steve, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm great for you here. So this is the big question. Why does anyone think that Ron DeSantis has any chance at all, knowing that in 2016, Donald Trump systematically, a piece of cake, took out 16 other top-notch Republican governors? How could DeSantis be any different than those previous 16?
Sure. Listen, few people in America have as much respect for the political skill of Donald Trump. I worked for him in 2016 and in 2020, and by the way, for most of the years in between. So believe me, I recognize and understand and appreciate what he did for America. I think he was exactly the right disruptor that we needed in 2016. But I think what we also learned is that many times in life, in business and politics, that disruptor is not the one to implement policy. And unfortunately, I think we need to confront reality, even those of us who admire President Trump, who consider ourselves part of the America First movement. And the reality is we have been losing elections, and the trend is significant and unfortunate. 2018, 2020, 2022. This country is now being governed as if the entire nation were Berkeley, California, or New York City. Why? Why are we being governed by radical leftists who are remaking our society into something that Americans don't want, both culturally and economically? That is happening. That pain is happening because we have lost eminently winnable elections. Now, I don't believe that we're losing because our agenda is wrong. I believe our conservative, patriotic, populist philosophy is exactly right, and that America is generally a center-right country ideologically. But our tactics and our leadership has been wrong. And when I look at that, who's the outlier? What is the exception to this trend of losing? It's the state of Florida broadly, and it's Ron DeSantis specifically. And that's why I've made this choice, difficult choice, frankly, for me personally, to switch teams, because I want what is best for America. And I believe Ron DeSantis can both win the general election as well as govern and implement a very conservative policy agenda after he wins.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions on that, because this is the only question that matters, is who can win the general election. Nothing else matters. No policy nuance here that matters. Or who is going to win the darn thing. Otherwise, nothing else matters. Okay, so what is Trump's, politically, in a political campaign, what is his weak spot? I think of him like the Death Star. There's got to be one part of him that is yet to be attacked, or he's like the final boss of a video game, and there's one way that no one else, no one in the media, no other candidate's been able to get a hold of. What do you think it is, and how is DeSantis going to exploit that?
I think there are two primary weaknesses. The first is the border. Donald Trump ran in 2016 with his signature promise, really almost his singular promise, that he was going to build a wall, build a great Trump wall, and that Mexico was going to pay for it. That did not happen, and he had full control of Washington, D.C. for the first 2 years of his term. He had the House and the Senate. He got other legislation through, legislation which might have been fine, and I certainly supported most of it. But the point is, he did not deliver on his signature promise. Now, what are the consequences of that today? We have a border that is absolutely out of control, and that's not Trump's fault. Okay, that is Joe Biden's fault. But the point is, if we had his supposedly big, beautiful wall, the situation would be far better today than it is. So he failed miserably. It's one of those occasions where I believe he was great on bluster, he was great on disruption, but he failed at implementation and delivery. And I think the second issue then, and this one is where Ron DeSantis really shines in contrast, the second vulnerability for Trump is clearly COVID. Donald Trump handed the keys to the kingdom effectively over to Tony Fauci, who became a de facto dictator for a time in 2020 over the United States. And he effectively ruled this nation, especially blue jurisdictions, with tyrannical and totally unscientific edicts. And that is because Donald Trump acquiesced and surrendered to Tony Fauci. In Ron DeSantis, we saw exactly the opposite as the governor of Florida. At first, he did take the advice of the Trump White House and the Trump task force and Tony Fauci. But he very quickly realized that the science and logic and data were pointing in a very different direction. And Florida then became the beacon for the entire country of how to reopen safely, aggressively, how to keep kids in school, unmasked, playing sports, and the entire country responded, by the way, many of them voting with their feet, people who were able to moving to Florida, those who were able to visit for extended stays, traveling to Florida. Florida became a beacon for the country, and it has remained that, by the way. It's not just a COVID story. I think that's the most significant aspect, but in other ways. Florida is a place, for example, where people can feel culturally that there's sanity in the state, that their children in primary grades, first and second grade, will not be subjected to perverse, highly sexualized indoctrination in their schools. It's a state where economic opportunity abounds, one of the fastest growing economies in the entire country. So the record of Ron DeSantis on COVID specifically, but I would say even more broadly, is the record of somebody who doesn't just make significant promises, but then can follow through and implement on them through process, through team building, and through a methodical approach to actually governing.
Okay, so fine and dandy, Steve. What you just spoke to was the brain. What wins elections, what gets attention, what gets clicks, what gets people excited, what gets people passionate, out to the polls, people who have never voted before, is the heart or the feels. Sure. And Trump crushed that in 2016 and was able to swat everyone away, no matter how great their plans and their policies and their governing abilities. Like Bobby Jindal, Scott Walker, and like all these guys could have made that same argument about what great governors we are, what we've accomplished in our states. And Trump just made up a nickname and swatted them away and made some jokes, and that's the end of it. And the people supported Trump. Right. So how is DeSantis going to speak beyond the brain? I don't even know how to we're like, how is he going to get after Trump? Trump the candidate, Trump the larger than life persona, Trump the idea that people love so much.
Yeah. By the way, and I'll be the first to admit, this is a challenge, and it's the challenge, in fact, for Ron DeSantis. Because you're right, we can't just make the intellectual and policy argument. We also have to appeal to the spirits of people, to the id, to the visceral sense. Yep. Right now in America, Americans have never been more miserable. And that's not my opinion, by the way. That is shown by every relevant metric, by almost all polling. For example, Wall Street Journal poll that has gone back decades to the 1990s, 78% of the American people do not believe today that their children will live a better life than they have lived. That is by far the worst mark in American history. So the country is in an incredibly anxious place because of the policy failures right now of Joe Biden. The person who can speak most effectively to that anxiety and can most effectively propose solutions is Ron DeSantis. And the reason I say that, even on a visceral level, not just on an intellectual level, the reason I say that is that Donald Trump has been highly entertaining. And I think at first that was very tantalizing to a lot of voters, to get this outsider who was willing to effectively blow up the political system. It was very necessary. It was very needed. But over time, if that entertainment is not followed through with delivery, with making the lives of regular folks better, it reaches an exhaustion point. And I think also what Americans realize is that largely because of Donald Trump and his failure to implement, the radical left now inflicts its will upon the country. The reason that we have an open border, the reason that we have children across America being shamed for something like having white skin, for the skin that they were literally born in, the reason those tragic realities are inflicted upon America is largely because of the failures of Donald Trump, both the failures as in governing as well as the electoral failures. So I think when in Ron DeSantis, we have somebody who can appeal as, I am going to be truly your warrior. And I'm not just going to talk about it. It won't just be loud protestations on social media. I'm going to actually, let me be specific here, I'm going to actually take on Disney, the most powerful company in his state. He took them on because Disney tried to insert itself into areas of policy where it had no legitimate concern. It just wanted to inflict a woke agenda upon the citizens of Florida. And Ron DeSantis punched back, and he punched back hard. And guess who leapt to Disney's defense? Not just the leftist media, which we would expect, but also Donald Trump. Also, the other candidates, by the way, in the race, people like Nikki Haley, all of them leapt to the defense of Disney when Ron DeSantis said, wait a second, I am the warrior for the people. So I think on those kinds of issues, in terms of taking our culture back, realizing that this country is sliding into an oligarchy that is a combination of big business interests along with secular humanist leftist ideologues. I think people are revolting quite properly against that. They're sick of losing to that cabal. And given that reality, I think Ron DeSantis has an excellent opportunity here to capture not just the hearts, not just the minds, but also the hearts of those people.
All right, Steve. So you say he's a warrior of the people. Okay. He's actually out of touch, sanctimonious. He's in bed with big money. Right after his announcement, he goes off to a big fancy hotel with the big time donors. And he is a stooge and a tool of the big globalist money makers here. What do you say to that?
Well, first I would say, look, any significant politician takes significant amounts of money from wealthy people. That's just the reality. It's how our political system is funded. Donald Trump does, Ron DeSantis does. But I would say this, and let me give you a very specific example in the state of Florida. Petterfy, Thomas Petterfy, he's the founder of Interactive Brokers. He's one of the richest men in America. He's the second richest man in the state of Florida. He's been a significant backer of Ron DeSantis. He very recently announced publicly, he went on the record, gave an interview to the Financial Times. He said, I will no longer back DeSantis because he signed a pro-life law in the state of Florida. So here you have Ron DeSantis willing to defy one of his biggest donors, one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in America, and certainly in his state, willing to defy him to do what's right, to do what is right on principle, and to protect mothers and to protect babies in the womb. So that's just one example. I could give others, but that's maybe the most significant example of him not remotely being the puppet of donors. So I think that's the reality when we look at the record.
We have 1 minute. Next time we chat, I want more examples because those are going to be important for his campaign to make public. Okay, what do you say to this, Steve? Last question. To the person who's like, listen, I like DeSantis, Florida, good. He's only 44. Why not just wait? Just wait your turn. Trump's the guy. We have to revenge what happened in 2020. It was an injustice. He's a once-in-a-lifetime candidate. This is his last chance. So let's go all in on Trump. Let's not stop messing around. Stop wasting money. Stop wasting time with this whole silly process. He's our guy. Let's get him back in there. He'll serve one more term. Then it will be Ron DeSantis' turn when it's proper.
Listen, I understand that argument, and I think if we were in more normal political and cultural times in America, it might make some sense. But we know what time it is in America. We know that we are losing our country day by day. And because of that, it's an imperative that we win this election. And Donald Trump is the most polarizing figure in American politics. And he is unable to secure the victory that we need against Joe Biden. And in Ron DeSantis, we have not just an ideological contrast, but also an age contrast against Joe Biden. So he is the most effective, most plausibly electable person for the Republican Party to nominate.
Hey, I'm Mike Slater. Thanks so much for watching that clip. If you want to see more truth like that, please subscribe to the First YouTube page. Just hit subscribe below.